Welcome to the 7th thematic panel focusing on China and the Indo-Pacific. I request the chair and the panelists to take the stage. The panel will be moderated by Professor Chintamani Mahapatra, who is the founder and honorary chairperson, Kalinga Institute of Indo-Pacific Studies, Bhubaneswar. The speakers of the panel are Kanishkh Kanodia, who is an academic fellow, Chatham House, focusing on the Chinese view, how the Chinese view Indo-Pacific, explaining China's dismissiveness. He will be joining us online. We have Biyon Sony Joseph, assistant professor, Department of Political Science, St. Thomas College, Palai. His presentation will be on China's perception and strategic responses to the contested Indo-Pacific security order. Alvina Antonia Almeida, research intern, Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense. She will be looking at assessing China's strategic impact and the influence in the Indian Ocean region. And lastly, Cchavi Vasisht, senior research associate, Chintan Research Foundation. Her topic will be on the convergence and conflict, the Belt and Road Initiative in Myanmar's evolving landscape. For more details on the speakers, please scan the QR code provided in your ID cards. A note to the speakers, each speaker is allotted 12 to 14 minutes for their presentation. And without further much ado, I hand the session over to the chair.
Namaste. Good afternoon. Don't wish you happy sleep now. This post-lunch most difficult session. I'm sure the panelists will keep you awake. The topic, China and Indo-Pacific. I'm very happy that a session on Indo-Pacific is here because I have a think tank called Indo-Pacific. Chinese will be very unhappy that there is a session on China and Indo-Pacific because they don't like the term Indo-Pacific. I recall a few years ago, a Chinese delegation was in India. We were holding dialogue. After my presentation, one Chinese stood up and very assertively said, Indian Ocean is not India's ocean. I said, is South China Sea China's sea? He said, yes. Then why can't it be Indian Ocean, India's ocean? Then he said, that is an ocean, this is a sea. When I said, if we change the name, Bay of Bengal to East India Sea, and the Arabian Sea to West India Sea, will you accept? No way. They don't like Indo name in the Indo-Pacific. But Indo-Pacific has come to stay. Even India, for quite some time, was dilly-dallying whether Indo-Pacific is good, bad, until the Modi government came to power and Prime Minister Modi articulated India's vision, India's understanding, India's concept of Indo-Pacific. So we have to have a session on Indo-Pacific and how China looks at it, perceives it, what kind of policies it is following it. So I'll not take more time, and I would request the first speaker, Kanishkh Kanodia, to make his presentation. Is he there? Has he joined?
Yes, hello, good morning. Can you hear me?
Oh, good to see you.
Good to see
One
you too.
administrative announcement before you start speaking. You know, in this hall, almost everyone knows something or the other about China and the Indo-Pacific. All of you also know. I would request you to make it a big debate, a good debate on China and the Indo-Pacific. So it should not be narrative, descriptive kind of presentation. In about 10, maximum 12 minutes, if you can articulate your main point of view, I'm sure we're going to have a very vibrant Q&A and discussion after the presentation. It pains me to say someone that please stop now. So I rather request you to be aware of the time, and in time, if you finish, that will be doing justice to time and to the session and to the audience. So with these brief remarks, let me now request Mr. Kanodia, please come online and make your presentation. 10, maximum 12 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Sure. I'll keep it under 10 minutes just to follow your instructions. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. And I'm Kanishkh. I'm currently an Academy Fellow at Chatham House in London. And my research focuses on how the Chinese view the Indo-Pacific. So as we've already got a bit of a background in terms of why the Chinese don't like the term Indo-Pacific. So I'll be exploring why is that the case and how has their reaction to the Indo-Pacific changed over the last few years. Um, so just a brief background. I don't think I need to explain to this audience what the Indo-Pacific is, why it's such an important region. So I will skip this. Um, let's look at, I think, when the Indo-Pacific itself became a sort of a strategic understanding, a strategic term. One of the big first documents that actually used the Indo-Pacific in a strategy document was a 2017 National Security Strategy document of the United States, in which they mentioned that the Indo-Pacific is a region in which they want it to be free and open. And they will, in the Indo-Pacific, they will strengthen alliances and partnerships of the US and create a network security architecture. And ever since then, a lot of subsequent US documents of the strategy documents have used the term Indo-Pacific. So if you look at the National Defense document, and also culminating into the 2022 Indo-Pacific strategy document of the Biden administration. So there's been an evolution in terms of how we have viewed the Indo-Pacific from not just a geographic concept to a more security led concept, in which I think other countries like Australia, India, Japan also have their own conceptions and their own documents of the Indo-Pacific. But I do believe that 2017, when the Trump administration used this in the NSS, is when it actually became a much more widely accepted security strategy as well. And as we already mentioned, that China doesn't like to use the term Indo-Pacific. In all of its security documents, they are very dismissive of the Indo-Pacific. So you can see some of speeches by Wang Yi, who was the foreign minister of China and former state councillor, that he says the Indo-Pacific is a regression of history that should be swept in the dustbin. There is never a shortage of headline-grabbing ideas. And so the Chinese have generally been very dismissive of the idea of the Indo-Pacific, and they don't like using it at all. And so sort of my understanding, my research was what has been the evolution of Chinese attitudes on the American Indo-Pacific policy and concept, and just this broad idea of the Indo-Pacific, right? And what are the reasons that can explain to us why the shift has happened, and how critical has India's position in the Indo-Pacific been to the way China understands and responds to the Indo-Pacific as a concept? From a research methodology, I was actually in Beijing for the past year, and so I was able to conduct 12 semi-structured interviews and look at scholarly articles on Indo-Pacific strategy, for which the Chinese term is Yin Tai Chanware, and look at the primary sort of spokespersons and what are the statements they say about the Indo-Pacific as a whole. And so sort of my first argument is that there has been an evolution in the reaction of the way China views and has talked about the Indo-Pacific. So there is a debate in the literature that has China's reaction been consistent, has it changed, and if it has changed, why has it changed? And I do believe that it has changed over the last, let's say 2017 onwards until now. And initially, if you see, the policy within China was viewed as non-threatening. They saw that it's just one of the big headlines that the US and other countries propose, and it'll just be dusted in the books of history, and no one is going to care about it. But then as the years went along, the term stuck around. And not did it just stick around, but it also became more enriched. So within the Indo-Pacific, there was more and more proliferation of new initiatives, both security and economic. And I think China began to understand that it is a concept and a strategy that will stay, and that it'll impact adversely China's own interests and security. So if you look at the debate in the literature in terms of how at least the Chinese scholars view China's reaction to the Indo-Pacific, there's three different strands. So one said that China was initially accepting of the idea because it said that it'll die down, it doesn't have any substance to it. Second said that China was dismissive since the beginning. Why? Because China has always believed in the idea of Asia-Pacific. Like if you look at the Asia-Pacific Economic Conference, it sort of showed a more economic integration side to it, whereas Indo-Pacific is a security and strategic concept to it, which is why China has been dismissive initially since the beginning of it. And third is sort of that China has been cautiously critical of it. For example, if you look, ASEAN has this ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific AOIP, and China actually did support the ASEAN's AOIP. And the argument is that we don't reject the Indo-Pacific as a concept, but we reject the American rendition of the Indo-Pacific. And no matter where you fall on this sort of spectrum of debate in the beginning, there is an understanding that from 2019 onwards is when China did become critical and dismissive of the Indo-Pacific concept. So for example, Foreign Minister Wang Yi only started publicly talking negatively about the Indo-Pacific from 2020 onwards. And so why has there been an evolution of this, of China's strategy and reaction to the Indo-Pacific? So sort of my key argument is that China has had a stronger understanding of the aims, means, and ends of the Indo-Pacific strategy. So there's two trends simultaneously, right? The first trend is just China's understanding became better, and the second trend is also within the Indo-Pacific, all the policies and all the strategies and initiatives were coming to light. And so as these two trends were happening simultaneously, China understood the aim of the Indo-Pacific policy is to actually contain China by introducing bloc politics and confrontational alliances in the region. If you look at the statement on the right, you see that the kind of language China uses in this is very reminiscent of the Cold War, right? They understand the Indo-Pacific as like a policy to contain China, as a policy to introduce like alliances in the region, which China does not like at all, and also to maintain U.S. hegemony. And how do they see China's means, US's means of doing that? Is that China thinks that the US's primary pillar of the Indo-Pacific is in the security realm by having more and more multilateral groupings and strengthened bilateral partnerships. And the end to which they see is that what this policy is doing is that it is changing the pre-existing stabilizers of security in the region. So, for example, it is challenging ASEAN's centrality. And it is also creating a feeling of encirclement within China, which is heightening its threat perceptions. And it has also led to a shift in the regional actors towards China. So a great example is India, right? As already mentioned, that India was dilly-dallying initially towards accepting the Indo-Pacific, but over the last few years, since 2014, 2015, it has become more accepting of it. And though the shift in the regional powers' attitude towards Indo-Pacific also threatens China and sort of heightens this feeling of encirclement. So there's just some phrases China uses to describe the Indo-Pacific. For example, it calls it the Indo-Pacific NATO, Cold War mentality, regional confrontation, alliance politics. So you can see some of the phrases and words China uses. They do feel threatened by it. And so why do they feel threatened by it? I think, as I already mentioned, that my second big argument is that because there has been a proliferation of bilateral and multilateral security architectures and security policies in the region, obviously the US, India, Australia, Japan, South Korea are all countries that have been pretty active in this region in doing this, right? And so the new proliferation of security policies has been very consequential in shaping Beijing's attitude towards the strategy, given how immediate and far-reaching the consequences can be. So I just look at two, for example, the multilateral grouping of the Quad and the bilateral changing partnership of the US with India. So quickly going over the Quad, I'm sure the group knows what the Quad is. I will not explain it. But if you look at China's reaction to the Quad, it has, again, called the Quad an alliance at its core. It's called the Quad an anti-China alliance. It's sort of using the same phrases, like the Quad is leading to a Cold War mentality and confrontation, and that it's leading to a resurgence of Cold War type bloc politics in the region, which China completely rejects. Obviously, the four countries that are part of the Quad, so that Quad is not an alliance. It doesn't have a mutual security guarantee. And if you look at China's sort of perceptions of the Quad, I do think that that China's sort of threat perception of the Quad is based on the fact of what the Quad can achieve in the future, what potential these four countries have of actually giving a balancing power against China and actually deterring China in the future. So China has a lot of threat perceptions in the future of what this grouping can actually do and harm China's interests. And I think, in my opinion, that China's threats towards the Quad are not misplaced. But what is misplaced is the intentions of the countries in the Quad of why they're partaking in the Quad. And we can debate that in terms of what the intentions are and why these countries are institutionalized. And China believes that the only reason why they've come together in the Quad is to deter China, which I believe is not true, that there's a much larger narrative and much larger aim to the Quad as a whole. And just second, quickly looking at India's positionality as well, right? The context is that India has been moving closer to the US and away from China. And someone once said that Beijing has long lived with US alliances in Asia, but a realigned India would change the game completely. And so the convergence between the US and India's acceptance of the Indo-Pacific policy, and at the same time, sort of the divergences between India and China has affected how Beijing views not only Sino-Indian relations, but also the Indo-Pacific policies broadly. And so in China's perception, if you talk to them about India's current position, they said India has completely sided with the US, that India has let go of its non-alignment, India has let go of its autonomy, and because of this, they have this perception that because the way India perceives China's threat is moving closer to the US and is actually exploiting Sino-American tensions to get the US to partake in the region and to benefit India. And the way China views this as a consequence is that for the first time, I think if you look at the map, China is confronted with the two-front war reality, right? That obviously on the east, from the maritime domain, from Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, the US, but now also from the west, from India on a more continental front. And so I think it has shown to China that India is actually willing to challenge China in the broader strategic domain. And that has really heightened China's perception of the whole Indo-Pacific strategy. So if we look at, for example, just to summarize what I've been talking about, is that there has been an evolution of China's Indo-Pacific strategy. And as the strategy became more enriched, especially in the security domain, China began to understand the aims, the means, and the ends of the policy, and because of which it became very dismissive of it. So China views this as trying to contain China. It views it as trying to introduce bloc politics in the region. And in some ways, it views as like a potential harbinger of an Asian version of NATO that seeks to maintain US hegemony in the region. And what this has done is that sort of all the policies within the Indo-Pacific has led to sort of new US partners in the region. So most prominent of which is India. The US-India partnership has been going over the last 10 to 15 years. Secondly, it has introduced the prospect of two-front competition in the region from the maritime and the continental domain. And third, it has also created new geopolitical conditions in the region, which China has not really gotten used to yet. And China sees that harms China's interests in the region. For instance, challenging ASEAN centrality. And so the increased competition in the region can actually fragment the region and harm China's primary national security interests, which is why China has become more and more dismissive of it. So I will leave it there, but looking forward to the discussion, and thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Kanishkh. That was a good presentation. And I'm sure other panelists will also follow him in maintaining time. Right? So please stay on for any kind of Q&A. Right? So who's the next speaker? Who's the next speaker? Okay, next speaker is Mr. Joseph.
Hello. Respected Chair, fellow presenters, and everyone else present here, good afternoon. I'm Biyon Sony Joseph, and I'll be presenting my paper titled Chinese Perceptions and Strategic Responses to the Contested Indo-Pacific Security Order. So the research topic is pretty similar to Kanishkh's presentation, but at the same time, the research that has been done is pretty different as well. So to give a brief background, so we all know that for several decades, the Asia-Pacific region has been dominated by the United States, and at the core of it has been the hubs and spokes model, where the United States serves as the hub, the center, and the bilateral allies, they form the satellites or the spokes of the system. And the hub and spokes model, in addition to that, the US has also formed a wide array of security partnerships, strategic partnerships in the region. But this model, this system began to see fresh challenges only during the beginning of the previous decade, when China began to present a very new security order or a framework for the region, which is exclusively Asian in nature. And in doing that, we understood that Beijing was trying to signal, or we understood the intention of China that it is trying to reshape the regional security order, or it's trying to provide a new vision, a new conception to the regional security order. In response to this, we have been seeing several actors in the region, including the US, India, and others, pushing for the Indo-Pacific framework. And it has also been responded to by China by opposing this construct. So while these states have taken very strong steps to embrace the framework, China has been opposing it for some time. And we have seen that over the years, the conceptions of the Indo-Pacific from US, Australia, Japan, India, even European stakeholders, including Italy, France, Germany, UK, these have been studied in detail. But China's perceptions or China's attitude towards the Indo-Pacific, the association of China and the Indo-Pacific, like the chair said, it's not very much studied, or it is at the least relatively understudied. So my paper proceeds in this context. And the primary research questions that I've put forward are, how does China view the Indo-Pacific? What are its attitudes towards the Indo-Pacific? How does it see it? And consequently, subsequently, what are its responses? If China is opposing the Indo-Pacific, how is it responding to it? Is China providing something new, or is it trying to complement the existing order, and so on? And regarding the research methodology, I've done a qualitative study to understand the perceptions and the responses. My primary sources obviously include speeches of leaders and foreign minister, other foreign ministry officials, policy papers, white papers, official documents, etc. And the secondary sources include web articles, scholarly works, commentaries, etc. And to briefly touch upon the theoretical framework that I've used here, it's Barry Buzan's regional security complex theory. To give a very brief idea before I move on to the Chinese perceptions, I've used this theory to better understand and evaluate the organic evolution of the Indo-Pacific from a regional security perspective. There are several theories, but I felt that this one was the most appropriate one because Barry Buzan, after he gave this theory so many years ago, this has been reworked on, it has been revised by a lot of other authors and Buzan himself. So he says that the international system, in the international system, the states are existing in a web of security interdependence. And this web of security interdependence, there's a pattern which he sees it as clusters, and he terms those as security complexes, regional security complexes or RSCs. And he also argues that the states located within this regional security complex, they are more security interdependent on states within it compared to those outside it. And he started off with Middle East, South Asia, East Asia as security complexes. But in 2003, he came forward and argued that there's a very weak Asian supercomplex, where he was kind of anticipating the Indo-Pacific because there was a lot of connections between East Asia and South Asia. And in 2012, which was almost the time when the Indo-Pacific was actually becoming a reality, he said that it was a very definite supercomplex, a combination of South Asia and East Asia. So to move on to China's perceptions of the Indo-Pacific, we all know that it's quite obviously largely negative. China believes that it's a foreign policy tool that's very exclusive and antagonistic in nature. And it's used primarily by the United States to contain China's growing presence in the Asia-Pacific region. Now, officially, China has denounced the Indo-Pacific construct, and it continues to use the term Asia-Pacific instead of the Indo-Pacific. There have been several instances where the deep-seated aversion and the suspicions towards the Indo-Pacific has been very evident. Now, the very popular quote from Wang Yi is, they are like the sea foam in the Pacific or Indian Ocean. They may get some attention, but will soon dissipate. And we have seen phrases like the new NATO, and in the context of the Quad, like in the previous presentation, the Asian NATO, Indo-Pacific NATO, etc. And it's very interesting to note that all the Chinese foreign ministry officials, the Chinese foreign minister himself, when the media people or the people from the press, media personnel, they ask questions related to the Indo-Pacific, all the answers are given with Asia-Pacific. The replies will not contain Indo-Pacific, so the wordings are very peculiar, very particular. So a very important scholar, moving on, a very important scholar who has attempted to study China's perception or China's attitude towards the Indo-Pacific is Feng Liu, and he argues that due to the lack of primary sources, it's very difficult to understand what Chinese policy elites or Chinese political elites think about the Indo-Pacific. And one solution that scholars often put forward is to put Chinese IR scholars as proxies instead of the Chinese elites. So so Chinese IR scholars serve as intermediaries between Chinese leaders and the Chinese public, and therefore at least implicitly influence or reflect the policy preferences of Chinese decision makers. And in this context, I have used research work done by Li and Tianjiao Zhang. It's called From Conceptual Idea to Strategic Reality, Indo-Pacific Strategy from the Perspective of Chinese Scholars. So here, Chinese IR scholars, their perceptions are studied so that they serve as proxies to the Chinese policy and political elites. Now, in this work, these two scholars, what they have done is they have divided the evolution of the perceptions of the Chinese IR scholars into 3 stages. The first one is from 2013 to late 2017. So during the first stage, they argue that the Chinese IR scholars, they were not too pessimistic about the Indo-Pacific, and they were kind of ignorant, and there was a lot of ambiguity related to the concept, especially because of the ambiguity related to the geographical definition of the concept. All the different Indo-Pacific actors, they came forward with their own Indo-Pacific visions and conceptions, but there was a lot of ambiguity because none of their definitions were matching. And with time, there came a consensus that the US is definitely trying to balance China with the help of Indo-Pacific. Now, in the second stage, that is from 2017 to 2019, there was a lot of expansion in terms of the topic studied, the scope of the studies, etc. And divergent views also emerged. So some scholars, they believe that it's still all right. China is being open to the Indo-Pacific, but there were other views which stated that this can possibly move into an alliance system in the future. So after Trump came into power, the views were slightly changing. And after 2019, a lot of attention has been given to the Indo-Pacific because there has been a unanimous consensus regarding the fact that the US is definitely trying to contain China and not just simply balance or engage in cooperation or conflict. It's trying to contain China. So the conception has completely shifted post 2019, and they have become really pessimistic about it. And the scope of the Indo-Pacific from the Chinese scholars' perception has also significantly improved. They have begun studying India as a very important player. They have looked at ASEAN and their conception, etc. Nevertheless, the scholars believe that the strategic goals of the US were clear, even though the tone had slightly changed with the change in administration. So there were fewer contrasting opinions now. More or less everyone believes that the containment strategy is the only pure intention of the US Indo-Pacific policy. So in conclusion, what Li and Tian George Yang, what they are saying is, the conception of the Chinese IR scholars and the policy elites, it's like a co-moving rhythm. They influence each other, and they are almost always consistent. So what scholars are trying to do, what scholars who are trying to understand the Indo-Pacific, what they do is, they are trying to put them as proxies to understand the policy elites and the political elites better. Now, to move on to what China's responses are. So China has very clearly made it very clear that its aim is to replace the US as the region's primary guarantor of security, although it is yet to provide a very comprehensive framework. And a lot of principles and ideas and policies that China has put forward has been very consistent over the years, especially since 2014. And the first one and the most important one is the NASC, the New Asian Security Concept, which was unveiled in 2014 by Xi Jinping during the conference on interactions and conference building measures in Asia. So a key component, there are plenty of features. I'll be discussing 3 features here. A key component of speech was the call for common, comprehensive, cooperative and sustainable security in Asia, and this principle has persisted in all the subsequent Chinese policies on Asia-Pacific security. And the second feature is, China says that Asian countries can manage their security issues themselves. So to quote Xi Jinping, we all live in the same Asian family with our interests and security so closely intertwined. We will swim or sing together, and we are increasingly becoming a community of common destiny. He also bannered an Asia for Asians slogan and argued that it is for the people of Asia to run the affairs of Asia, solve the problems of Asia, and uphold the security of Asia. Now, this does not mean that the NASC is a very isolationist concept. China wants other countries, even from outside the region, as well as international organizations, to participate in Asian security affairs, but they will be playing a very supplementary role. The central role will still be played by China and the Asian countries. Third, China rejects the US as the permanent security actor in Asia, and in this context, it also obviously opposes all the US-led, value-laden security arrangements and the alliances. So China is clearly very allergic to bilateral alliances, and the solution that it has put forward is strategic partnerships. So in Chinese diplomacy, partnerships fall directly between mere diplomatic ties and alliances. So they want to forge partnerships, security partnerships, and we can see that a wide array of security partnerships, strategic partnerships, comprehensive partnerships have been formed with countries in Central Asia and Southeast Asia over the years. And the last point is the GSI, which is more recent. This was introduced in 2022. A concept paper was released in 2023, and even in 2024, Xi Jinping has been seen arguing for the utmost urgency of accepting this. So the GSI is like an extension of NAC. The principles are more or less the same, but a little expansive. And this concept is like a public good that China has to offer to the world. And along with other global initiatives like GDI, the Global Development Initiative, and GCI, the Global Civilization Initiative.
Joseph, 1 minute more.
Okay, thank you, sir. These are expected to be crucial tools in its efforts to reshape the rules-based international order. Now, to conclude, the Indo-Pacific has clearly made China quite anxious over the years, and its dismissive attitude towards the concept has grown over the years as it is convinced that containment is the intention behind it. Now, although countries like India and Indonesia and ASEAN, organizations like ASEAN have put forward a more inclusive version of the Indo-Pacific, China is very dismissive still and continues to have a very negative perception. China does not want to reconstruct the order from scratch, nor is it trying to complement it with the existing security order. It is trying to reshape it so that it is conducive to its own interests and priorities and acknowledge the primacy of China in Asia. In the years to come, although it will be forced to coexist with Indo-Pacific, it will not wait or hesitate any longer to push its own alternative. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joseph. For both the papers were complementary. Very nice. Excellent. Next speaker is Alvina ji.
Okay, ni hao, good day, respected chair, my fellow panelists, and dear audience. When I started thinking about a topic on China, I wanted to study an area that would be relevant to the Indian audience and also learn something different about China's strategies. Hence, I thought about diving into the Indian Ocean region. And today I'm happy to present my China's gambit in the Indian Ocean region. In the words attributed to the maritime strategist Alfred Mahan, whoever controls the Indian Ocean will dominate Asia. The destiny of the world will be decided on its waters. This is particularly true in the context of the struggle to gain maritime influence in the region. China, by nature, is an economy-driven power. China's post-1978 economic growth has turned it from an agrarian society to an industrial powerhouse. China's entire prowess lies in the supply chains it has created with almost all countries around the world. To maintain its impact and influence in the global power dynamic, China has taken certain initiatives that will aid in maintaining its impact and influence. The Indian Ocean region is the third largest ocean and a vital lifeline for international trade and transport. It borders 5 geopolitical areas, including Africa, West Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Oceania. The Straits of Malacca, Hormuz, and Bab el-Mandeb are the 3 principal choke points in the IOR, with approximately 40% of the world's oil production passing through them daily. The region attracts countries like China, Japan, and India to establish economic power and maritime security. China, as the largest economy in Asia and the largest trading partner of over 120 countries, it needs to have a certain degree of influence in the IOR to stabilize its trade. China's domestic oil consumption has grown dramatically, with more than 10% more barrels imported daily in 2023 than in 2022. At least 80% of its transit routes pass to the IOR, making Chinese influence necessary to protect its own key commercial lines. However, the irony is China is relatively new to the IOR and it does not border it, making it vulnerable to geopolitical events. Formally, the objectives of the paper aim to analyze China's strategies for expanding its influence in the Indian Ocean region. The paper also explores the limitations and challenges China faces in the IOR. The research questions are: how has China been able to expand its influence in the IOR despite its lack of direct geographic proximity? And what are the challenges China faces in maintaining its influence in the IOR? The study uses descriptive analysis to analyze China's influence in the IOR. It draws on primary sources such as government documents, policy statements, and secondary sources like academic literature and reports from international organizations. The study employs thematic analysis, comparative analysis, and case studies to identify key patterns, trends, and challenges related to China's partnerships, infrastructure projects, and military strategies in the region. Coming to the flesh of the matter, the answer to how has China been able to expand its influence in the IOR despite its lack of direct geographic proximity. So the first strategy is economic statecraft. In simple words, it is the use of economic tools to achieve foreign policy goals. Tools such as loans, developmental assistance, tariffs, and so on. China has portrayed itself as a transactional partner, providing loans and technology for developmental projects based on the country's needs without any interference into the country's internal affairs. In this process, the country will gain development and China will build its diplomatic influence. Therefore, the first strategy China has employed in the region is building strong economic connections. Now, good economic connections leads to improving diplomatic ties. The Indian Ocean region has struggled to operate internally as a cohesive bloc due to its diversity and vulnerability as island states and other regions have different geopolitical constructs. For example, the US does not have an Indian Ocean-centric policy since the countries in the region are either associated in Africa or with Middle East or South Asia constructs. Also within the region, the US, the United Kingdom, India, and France, who are considered as traditional players in the region, have ongoing disputes with the members of the IOR. This has created a space for new partners like China, which is the only nation with an embassy in all the 6 Indian Ocean islands, that is Sri Lanka, Maldives, Mauritius, Seychelles, Madagascar, and Comoros. And it has no standing territorial or sovereignty disputes in the region. This makes China a welcome player and an alternative in the region, building on its diplomatic and political presence to strengthen military and economic partnerships across all littorals. Despite being a non-Indian Ocean state, China has membership or observer status in all Indian Ocean regional organizations, including the Indian Ocean Rim Association, the Indian Ocean Commission, and the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, and the Indian Ocean Tuna Commission. The role as a credible and emerging security and economic partner can be viewed as a new role Beijing wants to play in the Indian Ocean. Third is, it wants to act as a reliable developmental partner. After establishing good diplomatic ties, China now steps in as a partner that will collaborate with states to address their developmental needs. China and the smaller states know for a fact that availing of developmental loans is a tedious process. Loans granted by Western sources come with conditions, and on the other hand, Chinese sources do not share these ideals. Some developmental projects include the highway building communications infrastructure for island states, providing Seychelles with submarine cables, upgrading Madagascar's telecommunication infrastructure, and building an inter-island undersea cable in Mauritius. China builds critical infrastructure like modern port facilities and digital connectivity through undersea cable infrastructure, addressing both local developmental needs and its own strategic interests. Fiber optic cables used in the undersea cables are indigenously manufactured in China and do not need foreign technology. Therefore, it becomes cost-effective for China to lay these cables. One of the most ambitious elements of the digital Silk Route, which was launched in 2015, is the Pakistan and East Asia Connecting Europe fiber optic cable called as PEACE. The PEACE cable originates in Karachi and the Chinese-built port of Gwadar and proceeds to East Africa, Egypt, and Europe before terminating in Marseille. In September 2024, HMN Tech, a subsidiary of Peace Cable International Network Co., which is the main investor and operator of the Peace Cable, announced that the Peace Singapore segment is ready for service, marking the full commercial connection between Singapore and France. Fourth is building strategic projects. Most of the projects China has aided in are strategic in nature. One set of the projects that got the name String of Pearls are various port projects China has built in various regions. While vast amount of the existing literature points out that these ports could be potential overseas military bases for China, however, the reality of the matter is far from it. Well-maintained and functional ports are necessary to facilitate smooth trade operations in the region. China's Maritime Silk Road initiative relies heavily on ports, which are crucial for linking the mainland to untapped markets across the Indian Ocean. An illustration is China has been Africa's largest trading partner since 2009. According to the IMF, China currently purchases around 16% of Africa's imports. In 2023, this added up to a record-breaking trade volume of $282 billion. About 3/5 of Africa's imports to China are primarily commodities, which include metals, mineral products, and petroleum. China, on the other hand, mostly exports Chinese manufactured goods, such as electronics and machinery. Port investments aim to improve capacity, reduce congestion, and upgrade infrastructure, extending China's commercial footprint in Africa. Ports are also essential for China's economic pivot to emerging foreign markets, reducing its reliance on volatile markets for raw materials and energy resources. China's investments in Africa's mining and energy sectors also ensure the seamless extraction of metals and resources like copper, phosphate, lithium, iron ore, and gold back to the mainland. In the recent 2024 Forum on China-Africa Cooperation in Beijing, China pledged 360 billion yuan in credit lines and investments to Africa. This is a significant reduction from previous commitments, reflecting a shift in China's approach to Africa amidst its domestic economic challenges and growing debt risks in African nations.
2 minutes.
Okay, and finally is as a security partner. Now, this is a boon or a bane position, but to summarize this, China purposely acts as a peacekeeping partner so that its own forces can get a little bit of practical experience in mediating conflicts, and also they will learn how to coordinate with troop contributing states and acquire cultural awareness and foreign language proficiency. Coming to the challenges, there are 3 challenges. The first challenge is external threats, which any player in the Indian Ocean region or any ocean region faces. External threats such as piracy, unregulated fishing, and protection of sea lines of communications are the foremost concerns for China. The second is countering other players and local narratives. Now, as we have seen, India, US, and Japan are aligning their interests in an anti-China, or they don't say that they are anti-China, but they imply that. So this kind of creates a barrier in narratives for China to access countries who are on the borderline, whether they should be with China or with the US. Then thirdly is the lack of moderate conduct by China. It's like China breaking its own oar. The challenges stems from China's own conduct and its lack of trust in China. If looked pragmatically, one of the main reasons China is active in Africa is for its own resource stability. Now, the way China exploits certain governments which are corrupt in nature has not gone unnoticed. While in the short term it might benefit the state leaders, in the long term it does not benefit the state. So therefore, the youth of the states have realized that it is important to be more careful on whom you partner with. And an example of this is in Kenya. There was a protest demonstration by the Kenyan youth, which fundamentally questioned their government on the partnerships that it has done with China and whether they are foolproof or not. To conclude, China does have lofty ambitions. The word around is it wants to be a hegemon. And it has been a good history student and learned from the past mistakes of previous and current big powers. Through very clever statecraft, being a good diplomat, literally acting on the saying, a friend in need is a friend indeed, China has been able to swim in the Indian Ocean region. However, it does face some turbulent waters when external threats, other major players steer the waters, and also when it asks for trouble by acting obnoxious. With this, I end my presentation. Shishi, thank you. Okay.
Please share, Alvina. Next, Cchavi ji.
Good afternoon, everyone. Moving from a very broader concepts of Indo-Pacific and Indian Ocean region, I will focus on a very important country which is often neglected, forgotten, that is Myanmar. which acts as a gateway or a bridge to South Asia and Southeast Asia. For those of all who don't know about Myanmar, Myanmar is very strategically located between South Asia and Southeast Asia. It has faced significant political and economic challenges over the past few decades, largely due to its military rule. This was the third military takeover or coup in the country in 2021, earlier in 1960s and then in 1990s. This has resulted in Western isolation and sanctions. And because of this isolation and sanctions, it has led to increased dependence on China, which they have developed into a relationship which is both complex and beneficial to the countries. In January 2020, a significant milestone was reached with Xi Jinping's visit to Myanmar, in which they celebrated 70 years of relationship. China's strategic closeness to Myanmar can be traced from the time since independence, also before that during Few Kingdom and all. But here the focus is to bring out their diplomacy after the 2021 military takeover. China has often viewed Myanmar as part of its tributary system, that is kingdoms the kingdoms who acknowledge China's supremacy in exchange for trade and political recognition. Though Myanmar held close its non-aligned stance in the 1950s, there were certain policy shifts. The two countries has also faced border disputes, the 192-kilometer border, which has a complex history marked by periods of tensions and stability. In 1967, there were anti-China riots, where China, post that, supported the Burmese communist groups, and there was almost 15 years of tension between the two sides. But things changed in 1980s because of the 1989 Tiananmen Square incident in China and the 1988 military coup in Myanmar, where both seeked allies because of the international isolation and sanctions. My area of focus is the Belt and Road Initiative, where these are the key points, and these are the major projects which China has in Myanmar. These are only certainly a few. Officially, Myanmar had joined BRI in 2018. Aung San Suu Kyi had attended the first two BRI summits in 2017 and 19, and in 2023, post the military coup, though it was expected that Min Aung Hlaing would be invited for the summit, but Myanmar's transport minister and another cabinet minister attended it. A total of 597 projects are there, worth 21.9 billion in Myanmar has been invested by China. So my research questions or objectives are stated here. Research objectives are, first, analyze the historical relationship and strategic dynamics between China and Myanmar, which has witnessed periods of both cooperation and tension. Assess the role of China's BRI projects in Myanmar, including both economic and social impacts of it. What is China's strategic goals in Myanmar? Evaluate China's dual engagement in Myanmar because it has been engaging both with the Myanmar military as well as the ethnic armed organizations, which has been the topic of debate in recent days, especially with Min Aung Hlaing's visit to China in November 2024, as well as later in the month, the Chinese leaders arrested the MDNA leader. And lastly, to investigate the challenges facing BRI projects amid Myanmar's internal conflict and political instability, especially post the military coup. The research methodology has been largely descriptive and analytic. The interviews were done with the current ambassadors as well as the former ambassadors, serving government officials as well as defense personnel, Assam rifle officers, and so on, and the use of secondary sources. Now, the key findings of the BRI projects. As I already stated, the China's interest in Myanmar is extending beyond economic gains to strategic influence. China's strategy to build a foothold in the Indian Ocean region, as already stated by Alvina, Myanmar offers a strategic land route to the Indian Ocean region, which helps China bypass the Malacca Strait, which is critical for China's energy security as well as strategic reach. It has also helped China to access the resources in Myanmar, especially with the Cchavi seaport, as well as the CMEC, which is a direct maritime link between Indian Ocean and China's Yunnan province. It also helps China access the Myanmar's critical resources, also the geopolitical interest in the region. As I said, it already has invested around 21.9 billion, which is comprising 23% of Myanmar's foreign investment. This economic reliance can translate into a political influence, which we have seen in recent times. Though Myanmar has been conscious of this approach, and there have been concerns of debt trap diplomacy and sovereignty risk, in 2020, an Auditor General report in Myanmar claimed that Myanmar is very concerned about the Chinese loans. Especially Myanmar is paying approximately 500 million USD annually at an interest rate of 4%. And while these, thank you. And while these suspicions are arousing, there are also local resistance to BRI projects, especially the Cchavi seaport project, as well as the Sony Hyderabad project, which was shut down during 2013. The impact of the military coup, there has been, again, sanctions and isolation from the Western countries, which has pushed Myanmar to China again. There has been increased Sino-Myanmar relations. Even the initial remarks by China at the UNSC conference was that it is a mere cabinet reshuffle and not the military coup. It has blocked all the UNSC resolution against the Myanmar military. Within this, an important highlight is that they have a significant arms transfer. Especially since 2021, over 267 million of weapon and related materials has been transferred to Myanmar military. There was even a Pentagon report which stated that China's efforts to establish military facilities in Myanmar, which is a cause of concern. Now, having the close relationship with the military, there has been high resistance against Chinese investments in Myanmar. 32 Chinese companies were vandalized in March 2021. For the first time in November 2023, there were protests against the Chinese investment in front of the China embassy. There are also negative sentiments, ongoing concerns about debt traps and lack of transparency. Even the military, who is getting most of its arms from China, they are also suspicious of China's interests. They know that they do prioritize BRI projects, but are wary of China's influence amongst the ethnic armed organizations. They have been restructuring committees to expedite the BRI implementation. The new Yangon City project, for example, the budgets have been redone, and they have revived the SAC plans to land acquisition. There has also been intensified efforts to form a CBEC zone in Shan State, which will offer a very short route to Kunming and Chukphayu. And it has also given green signal to Meeling Guang project, which is a natural gas project. Now, within this, the concern is that China has a dual engagement strategy. It is engaging with the military as well as the ethnic armed organization, and it is trying to balance its own interest. Especially since Operation 1027, which started last year, reports are that Chinese have supported arms, the ethnic armed organization through arms. In 2022, Ding Xiang, who is the China special envoy to Myanmar, met the military leaders, but also simultaneously met the ethnic armed groups. And these arms supply to ethnic armed groups has been a major concern for Myanmar military, and also to a certain extent to the Indian armed forces. Recently, they have also arrested the MNDA leader to pressure him from withdrawing from the Lasha region, which they want the military to take over again. Now, what are the challenges and uncertainties? First and foremost, there is a risk of debt diplomacy. There was a recent article by Yun Sun of Stimson Center, who stated that China is at the risk from being Balkanization to Pakistization. And if we see in the past, Chukphayu seaport project, they revised the stake of Chinese from 85% to later Myanmar share was increased to 30%. They also revised the CMEC provisions. There is a lot of fear that there is a lot of lack of transparency in these projects, and therefore they want other companies also to compete in these projects. There's a local opposition to Chinese presence. It is a very interesting survey which was done by ISP Myanmar, which revealed that the economic dominance and geopolitics influenced by China is a major challenge for Myanmar people, and they don't hold a very close or a very good perception about Chinese presence in the country. There are also continued strategic tensions. Myanmar's military balances China, as well as the fear of foreign influence on internal conflicts. And there is an ongoing conflict and border closures, especially with recent border closures that were done in the northern part of the region. Now, given this background, do BRI projects hold a ground for Myanmar? One, it is very uncertain. We don't know because there is a political instability going in the country, and there are security concerns as well. There is a debt and economic vulnerability. We have already seen the case of Pakistan and Sri Lanka. There is local opposition and environmental concerns, especially in the Irrawaddy region and the Kachin area as well as the Shan area. There are land right disputes, environmental risk, as well as transparency issues, which fuel a lot of resistance against the BRI projects. And there are conflict zones and security risk. Now, within this, China's dual approach, I'll highlight just 3 points here. One, in its garb to engage with both military and ethnic armies, they are leveraging influence on whosoever will hold power in the near future. If we know the Myanmar politics, we don't know where the elections would go and when, which side of the party would hold the control in the country, entire country to say so. Second, there's a geopolitical motivation where Myanmar serves as a strategic link in the Indian Ocean region, but is also wanting to counter US influence in the region. And lastly, the report indicates that there is a possible Chinese interest in establishing military facilities. Last week itself, there was a news that China is forming a security company for Chinese projects in Myanmar. This is something which is very alarming for India as well. Here, it is important to understand that there is an intertwining nature of economic development and security. This is a classic case which we saw in Pakistan and Sri Lanka, where the dependence on a single investor can lead to vulnerabilities, and these vulnerabilities are then exploited, because then China would ask for developing a security architecture. And countries in the garb of getting the economic support will succumb to this and try to form the security umbrella, which would be governed by China.
2 more minutes.
Yeah, so I'm just at the last slide. What is the future outlook? Well, for China, they can increase transparency. They can, go for the conflict resolution mechanisms. They can go for local engagement and environmental protections. But what is there for India? Why is it such a concern for India? There is competition of investments and infrastructure development. India has reached out to Myanmar in its own way, especially with people-centric projects, whether it is in Rakhine, the state development projects, or the Kaladan multimodal projects. Second is the most important security concerns for India, where it shares 1643-kilometer boundary with Myanmar. The present border has been taken over by the ethnic armed organizations, which is a cause of concern for India, and therefore India is trying out to reach to these ethnic armed organizations. And even the present military takeover has resulted into crisis in the northeast region. We all are aware of what happened in Manipur last year, which has its ramifications till date. There have been refugees which are coming in. There are insurgent activities which are gaining ground, and the supply of drugs and arms, which are a cause of concern for India. And lastly, Myanmar acts as a bridge, though it may be often said that it is a bridge to South Asia, Southeast Asia, but if we see the strategic location of the country, not just in terms of border security and national security, we share close ethnic ties with those people. And therefore, it is a strategic investment for India to look at Myanmar not just as a gateway to Southeast Asia and a pillar to East Asia, but as a very strategic neighbor partner. Thank you.
Thank you, Cchavi. I think we had 4 excellent presentations. A lot of information, some analysis, insightful comments and observations. All of you have done good justice to time also. Now let's open it up for Q&A. Please be extremely brief, no long presentation. If there's any question to whom you're addressing it, please explain. We can have 2-3 rounds of Q&A. First 3 questions, please raise your hands.
Hi, my question is from Cchavi. So as China is increasing its footprint in Myanmar, what do you think are implications for India's national interest? And how can India factor in China factor in its foreign policy strategy towards Myanmar?
Thank you. Next. Please raise questions. Don't provoke me to speak. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I was wondering if the students from the back could ask questions first. So my question is to, Joseph, yeah. Because you said you're looking to some of the sources with regard to, you were saying the scholars were proxies for the Chinese government or of the Chinese political elites you were talking about, right? So I was wondering if you had looked to some of these Politburo studies sessions. I think that can be a place where you can really look into who are these scholars visiting and giving lectures to those political elites Actually, in China, you have these Politburo study sessions given by different scholars. I think that would be a good place to really look into. Yeah, thank you. That's it.
One more question, please. How can there be no questions on China?
Hi, good afternoon. Yeah, my question is somehow related to China, sir. Regarding the Asia-Pacific region, and my question here is, we're aware that China is heavily present in the region. It's being involved both financially and militarily. We all consider it, at least from this perspective, as a threatening situation for India. From your research from the panel, how is India to perceive Chinese presence in that region? Should it engage in more bilateral or multilateral discussions, or should we consider decoupling, as most of the Western countries were trying to do? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kanishkh, do you have anything to respond?
Sure. I think I'll just take the last question a bit on like if India, how should India engage in terms of bilateral engagements as compared to decoupling? I think if you look at decoupling from the West, I think the West is also realizing that decoupling is not possible. It is not a strategy that's actually effective. You can talk about how the Trump administration is going to handle it, but it does seem like an unwise policy, and the conversation has obviously shifted a lot to de-risking. And if you also look at India, I think India's positionality in that, we do see that India's biggest trade partner was China last year, right? And if you look at the kinds of equipment India used to trade from China, it is a lot of machinery, a lot of equipment, electronics that we have not found substitutes for thus far. So I think decoupling as a strategy in of itself will not only harm India's interests, but India's own like technological and economic development and growth capacity, which seems like a very unwise policy, in my opinion, to follow. Thank you.
Thank you, Kanishkh. Joseph?
Thank you, sir, for the suggestion. I haven't looked at the Politburo study sessions, actually. I've only looked at most of the scholars from Fudan University, Tsinghua University, etc. So I haven't looked at the sessions that are done within the Politburo. So I'll keep that in mind. Thank you. And regarding bilateral relationships or multilateralism, decoupling, etc., I think from India's perspective, a lot of minilateral work is happening. Because India feels a lot of comfort and flexibility in terms of dealing with especially middle powers in the region, so that it does not draw the wrath of China a lot, but at the same time it can exclude the United States to some extent, preserve its strategic autonomy, etc. So a lot of countries in the region are trying to work in that manner in multilateral groupings, so that work can actually be done, and it's not the multilateral institutions. But at the same time, it can also engage in a lot of consultations with China at the same time. So that's another option that India is really exploring right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Cchavi?
Okay. Regarding security implications on India's national security concerns, it is not just the economic competition that India is concerned about. If you have seen the history, since 1960s, China has been a major supplier of arms and providing training to other insurgent groups in the Northeast region. So this is one of the major concerns that India faces. And second, if China reaches out to the Indian Ocean region, now it would be direct, it would place China in direct confrontation with India and in its backward. If we know that China has already invested in the Coco Island region, which is very close to the Andaman Islands. Last year, I remember there were images that were released by the different agencies, which really created a ruckus in the Indian security forces, that this is a cause of concern. If China is right across in our maritime borders, it is a cause of concern for India.
Alvina, if you have to...
Addressing whether India should engage bilaterally with China, I would rather say that India should kind of study how China fills in the gaps, especially in the Indian Ocean region and the Indo-Pacific / Asia-Pacific region. I think China really studies what the region needs and understands the crux of what they don't like and what they like. And India, on the other hand, has a cultural benefit. I feel India should just study the region and fill in the gaps instead of allowing China to fill in. Like, for example, when I was studying the Indian Ocean region, most of the island countries have historical and cultural ethnic linkages with India. But for some reason, either politically or culturally, they do not want to engage with India. So India would need to, because of past experiences, it's not like India they first-handly objected to India's involvement. India was involved in the region, but because India lacked the commitments or the promises that it made, or delays in the infrastructure projects, the shift went to China. So China is relatively new in the region, and it is filling the gaps. So I feel instead of bilaterally engaging with China, which India cannot because of its strategic implications, perhaps try to study and fill in the gaps in its own region first. That's my take.
Let me give just a footnote to Cchavi's presentation, and then we can have second round of questions or small, brief comment. You know, China has invested in Sri Lanka, and all of you know the fate of the Hambantota port. I have visited Hambantota port. Wide roads, beautiful place, but no trucks going, no trucks coming. And Sri Lanka has become indebted so much that now Hambantota port has been given on lease. I went to Kathmandu once and delivered a lecture on BRI, and I requested them. I'm not Mr. India, I'm not an ambassador, I'm not government of India, I'm just Masterji. You take it or leave it. And give the example of not only Hambantota port, but also Ecuador, in Latin America. Ecuador was indebted. They had a lot of debt. China gave only peanuts, $12 billion, signed an agreement with Ecuador for next 99 years. Ecuadorian oil will be sold to China, only China, and nothing but China. And to my surprise, all of them opposed me. And later I came to know that that very morning they had signed an agreement with China. I'm not saying that it is because of me, but because of the awareness subsequently, until today, not a single project in Nepal has gone on. Bangladesh burnt its finger a little bit, and recently they are rethinking. Until the change of government, we don't know what is going to happen. So Chinese military presence, in a way, is good. Most of them were debating, if India is not going to help us, why can't we go to China? They give us the capital, they build fantastic roads, good for communication, great connectivity. Nobody is helping us, not the Americans, not the Europeans, not the Indians, why not Chinese? But later, when slowly they are realizing the cost of that, I think there is a certain amount of backtracking. How about our friend Pakistan? Chinese nationals are being attacked in Pakistan. 12,000 Pakistani soldiers are employed to protect the Chinese. And now China wants to send its own forces to Pakistan to protect their own people in Pakistan, right? In a way, Pakistan also is realizing fast, not the government. The intellectuals, the economists, they're saying that Pakistan is going to be a rentier state. We'll be getting rent only. The POK, one of the reasons why India did not join the BRI is because of the sovereignty issue in POK. It is good to go through who said what in policy papers and the statements of great leaders. But sometimes you can also collect some information from unknown sources, very difficult sources. Once I was watching one little program on YouTube. There's one Kashmiri guy, POK, he's sitting there, and he's watching big trucks coming and big trucks going. Then one guy is asking him, are you happy? The roads are wide now. There are no roads at all. He says, yeah, roads are there. But how do I gain? And what do I gain? Except the pollution. We don't benefit anything. Trucks comes from China, goes to Pakistan, does something, goes back to China. How do we benefit? These kind of questions are being raised in places like Pakistan occupied Kashmir. So while China has done a fantastic job, and most of the China scholars will be really appreciating their economic achievement and growth, that 100+ countries find in China the largest trade partner. And China is giving more aid and assistance probably than even the United States of America. And most of the American allies and partners find in China their #1 economic partner, trade partner, right? But the cost of that is very, very important. I think, Kanishkh, when you are presenting your paper, and at one point, either Joseph or Kanishkh, you mentioned, in the evolution of Chinese thought on the Indo-Pacific, how China has changed its position in a very nuanced way, and now they're endorsing ASEAN outlook, right, on Indo-Pacific. Kanishkh did that. So ASEAN outlook they have endorsed. So they are not endorsing Indo-Pacific concept, because it's American, they think. It's a design to contain them. But they are not opposing ASEAN. There is a diplomatic gain there. I don't know, ASEAN is important, no doubt. The Indians are saying ASEAN centrality. The Americans are saying ASEAN centrality. The Japanese are saying ASEAN centrality. How can China not say ASEAN centrality? They can do that. But the fact remains that as and when we adore and admire and praise the achievements of a country like China, whose economy was much less than that of India, GDP, by the 1960s. Until the 1960s, the Chinese families were not getting mutton meat to eat, every week, once in a fortnight. And this is not my sources from books or articles. I've interacted with them. I lived in China. Right? But today, Chinese economy has galloped so much that it is now apparently competing with the United States. So no harm in adoring them and admiring them, and probably learning from them somewhere. But it is extremely important to be aware and be conscious, because all said and done, great international law, great institutions, great liberal order, it is still a dog-eat-dog world. Somebody was saying in the morning, citing example of ICJ saying something to Israel and all that. And even ICC court, the International Criminal Court, 126 countries have signed the agreement only about 26 years ago. Is it enforceable? It's not. So ultimately, somewhere down the lane, countries big and small will have to think smart to protect their interest and not get indebted. Gone are the days there was colonialism. Today you don't see colonialism. We should be happy that 193 countries with quote-unquote sovereign equality of nations are the members of the UN. But is there sovereignty? There's not any sovereignty anywhere, not even in the United States, right? The vulnerabilities and all. So we have to be aware about what China is doing and not doing. And we realize through our own trade activities with China. So with this footnote to make you aware of China, let us go for another round of questions or brief comments. Please raise your hands. Yep. It appears all of them have understood what all you have said. You please go ahead. Yeah.
So just to ask about, just ask a question about what you just said about how we should be aware of China and the long-term implications of these projects. So there is I don't know who said it, but there is a quote that says, in the long term, we all die. So in this regard, many of the people, the leadership who undertakes these projects, the benefits or the negatives of these projects might not be seen in their lifetime. It might be like gone before. They'll be gone before that. So, and they really don't care like for the future generations. For them, it's that political pride. So if optics is the big guiding light for many of these deals, whether it's in Africa, whether it's in Asia, how do we make it practical? Like what you said, how can we make it practical? Because like if we go and warn these people and tell them, okay, the Chinese are like this, we will provide better. But the question they'll be asking is, what can you provide right now? So just to say one more thing, the Chabahar port, how we had it, now it's being handed over to China. Iran has been relatively close to us. Even with the sanctions, we have traded in their currency, and we've gotten oil at a very concessional rate. So how do we go ahead with that? That's my question.
Correct. Not only Chabahar port, the same thing happened in Maldives. Contract came to India, then China went and bribed them, and the contract was taken away from India, then given to China. Same thing happened in Myanmar a couple of times. This is the nasty way the Chinese are trying to snatching away all the contract the Indian companies have won. But your question is very valid. That is why I wanted to say in a morning session, but I did not, even yesterday. You see, everyone who are studying China, they would say, we don't understand China. We have to understand China. You can't even understand yourself. Every individual in the universe is different. I'm not saying that understanding China is not important. It is important in the long term. In the long term. But your question is about the short term. Please don't think that I'm bragging or anything, but a little bit of biodata. In the 1980s, you could count the number of Indians who were studying China. I was working in IDS at that time. If you run your eyes through the publications and the reports and commentaries, a lot of debates about, is China going capitalist? How much capitalist? 38%? 43%? Or they are asking the American companies to now invest in all that? I don't know much about China. But then it occurred to me that it is one thing to study China, their philosophy, their culture, their history, their psychology, to understand them. But as time is limited and we pass by, we have to be aware of what the Chinese are doing and not just thinking or what they are. So I saw one little news somewhere on Nepal, that Nepal has got some contract to build a road. I spent about 3 months doing research into it, and then I concluded. I wrote an article, 4,000 words, in strategic analysis that time. I found through my research that a Nepali official will come to Delhi, go to Minister of External Affairs, talk to them. We want development of our country, you are India, please help us. And the Babu will say that, look, we are all bureaucrats, we don't build roads, go to companies. Then he would approach the companies and they will say, it is very costly to build roads in Nepal. Those days, Chinese embassy in Delhi, the main road was painted red. But the Chinese diplomats were smart. They would monitor all these developments. Those guys will be invited to Beijing, offer the contract. Chinese capital, Chinese technology, Chinese engineers will come and build roads. And when I was writing the article, I found the roads were built patch by patch by patch. And by that time, from Lhasa to the Terai region of India, trucks could come. And that had tremendous amount of strategic impact on India, right? The day that article in strategic analysis was released and it hit the newspapers around the world, it became a news scoop. Next day in the parliament, big uproar. 60 truckloads of Chinese weapons are coming to Nepal. Nepal violated the Indo-Nepal peace treaty or some treaty. It is the duty of the intellectuals like us to have 1% of your investment in understanding in depth a society, a people, a country. Another one is to keep your eyes and ears open and see the action and the possible implications. Same thing on Bangladesh. When I touched my hand on China-Bangladesh relationship, I found that in 1986, when Rajiv Gandhi ji, our Prime Minister, was in Moscow, General Arshad was in Beijing. He signed an agreement with China that in the next round of Sino-Indian war, Bangladesh will not allow the movement of Indian troops through its territory. All of you know of the chicken neck, right? Nobody monitored it, not the Indian embassy in Beijing and nor in Delhi. How did I come to know? Those days in IDSA, we were getting one magazine come journal called Far Eastern Economic Review from Hong Kong. In every issue, weekly, on page number 12, there will be an intelligence column. There were 60 words write-up on this. Then I wrote an article of 4,000 words because I went into the details. Not a great China specialist. I don't know Chinese language, nothing. But then I thought, as an individual, as a student of international relations, I must know what our people around India are doing. This is what we should do. This is what I urge all the students to keep your eyes and ears open and not just read great books and philosophy and Confucius and all that. And of course, be aware of Confucius Institute. Any other questions? Some more questions, comments? Time okay? Written questions. 10 minutes, huh? 10 minutes more, please. Raise your questions, comments. Yeah, there is a question.
Hi, good evening. So I have a question for Dr. Cchavi. We generally, when we talk about China, Myanmar, we tend to notice that there is a perception problem, which is there. Going away from just looking at the increase in trade, the increase in defense ties and others, at the ground level, probably there is a perception problem about China and China's investments and the fallout from China's investments, which are there. So considering that with the situation which we are seeing right now in Myanmar, so how do you perceive the two outcomes, right? Whether the military succeeds in restoring its own power back, or there will be a fragmented EAO combination of factors which will form the next government in Myanmar. So how will they react to China's perceptions according to your analysis or understanding of the current situation?
Firstly, it's very difficult to say who will form government in Myanmar. Military says that it will hold elections next year, but that's not true. And they can really hold elections just by conducting it in 50% of the territory. And that would be a kind of a facade, not the true elections. And there is a possibility that Myanmar would be fragmented or balkanized in the near future, with the border regions being taken over by the ethnic armed organizations and the central region of the territory being taken by the Myanmar military. Having said these circumstances, what is India's perception? Within Myanmar, the perception amongst the ethnic armed organizations is very suspicious, as well as within the military ranks. While they are expediting the BRI projects and they are trying to go ahead with it, sign certain agreements, but there is a very strong internal fear among the military also, because they know that Myanmar, China can anytime play its ethnic armed organization card. If we see in January 2024, the NUG released a 10-point program on China. This was not done for India, this was not done for any other country, but they released it for China. Why? Because they also want to serve China's interest in the region. Once I was in a very closed dialogue with the NUG people, and I asked them that what if India supports the NUG people and the ethnic armed organization? This is just when the military coup had happened. So they said, no, we will support both China and India. They both are same for us. So even if in 1988, if we go back to that time when India supported the student protest and India was in support of the people of Myanmar, we were not given the due credit of it. And when the military took over power, we were way far behind what China had with the Myanmar military leaders and the people of Myanmar. So now what the Indian government and the agencies are doing is, we are trying to balance our interest. One, keep ties with the military so that our border areas and security interests are there. We don't want to irk a relationship which has been developed with great difficulty, countering China. And we have also reached out to the people of Myanmar by providing aid during the cyclones or by providing support in other forms. So, yeah.
Let me, yeah, please.
My question is on Indo-Pacific per se. So since we are evoking the concept of Indo-Pacific repeatedly in many conferences, as well as we have set up think tanks, so we also know that it's a Western-led discourse. So how is India delinking itself from the Western-led discourse on it, and how are we or indigenizing the concept as such? Thank you.
Hello, sir. I'm Ashna, first year student DGIR. So my question is that how would Trump coming to power affect like a US Indo-Pacific strategy, and how would this recalibrate China's orientation towards the Indo-Pacific? Thank you.
I was about to conclude on that note, but any one of you would like to say in response to them? No? Okay. You know, the Americans define Indo-Pacific as from the western coast of India to the western coast of the United States of America. But in Indian perception, it runs through Eastern Africa, includes even Persian Gulf. So we don't get along on each and everything with the Western countries, right? We have our own narrative, own interest. For a long time, Indians were tongue-tied about what is going on in South China Sea. But today, when you see the Indian Prime Minister articulating the need for freedom of navigation, freedom of that overflight and all that, everywhere, in joint statements also, in ASEAN meeting as well. So that is a very, very big change. Number three, we have the Quad. The Chinese are worried about the Quad. India is actually the odd man out, or odd person out in Quad, because the other three, they are part of a strategic alliance. India is not. India is influencing in a moderate way its own view. It cannot be a contained China mechanism. We are doing the same thing in BRICS. We are doing the same thing in SCO. So India has its own role to play, own ambition, own understanding, and it is not signing on the dotted line of what the Western countries say. Having said that, Donald Trump has returned to power. It was not expected, actually, in a very big way. The opinion polls were saying that neck-to-neck race, and then suddenly he won with thumping majority. Now, Donald Trump being Donald Trump, it is not going to be Trump 2.0, which is a replication of Trump 1.0. This time, very well planned. He has a very big team, and the transition has already started. Names have already been announced. So I feel that as far as the Indo-Pacific is concerned, what Trump is going to do is not abandon Quad. After all, Quad was in hibernation for 10 years. It was Donald Trump who revived it in 2017 in Manila. So probably he will not do that. Most likely he will say no to IPEF, Indo-Pacific Economic Forum, which was floated by Joe Biden. So anything Joe Biden does, some of the things he would not like, he would like to have his own mark on that, so he will do that. Number three, initially he will start intensifying the economic Cold War with China. Economic Cold War, not the political security one over Taiwan. He would not do in Taiwan what Joe Biden did. Nancy Pelosi went to Taiwan and you saw the anger of China, in response to Nancy Pelosi's trip. He's not going to, tease China on all those small, small things, but economically, I think he's going to confront China. He wants to make America great again, and there will be fallout. There will be fallout. And the big worry for everyone in the region would be China being an economic partner of many, many countries, and the US continues to be the security provider. How to navigate if there is a Cold War between them? It is going to be a continuing challenge. But Biden administration understood and said, articulated openly, you don't have to make a choice, either America or China. You can do both. You do whatever you want. That is, in a way, kind of palliative to the Chinese. But the worries, the concerns will be there you have to talk to the diplomatic staff to know how the Chinese diplomacy behave, closed doors. In this kind of open forum, also बीच-बीच में कुछ बोल देते हैं, but otherwise, handling China is not easy. Final comment. We don't know much about what's going on in China. Even if we read China Daily or People's Daily or Xinhua or their TV sources, media is under the control of the government. So it is not easy to really understand what is going on within China. Having said that, on the other side, you have tremendous amount of propaganda materials on Chinese economy, on Chinese politics, on Chinese strike, Gherao Band inside China. A lot of materials are there. From there, we apparently find that China economy is now slowing down. That in China, we have hundreds of thousands of protests. That some big companies are moving away from China. That China's labor cost is increasing. That China's real estate, which is about 33%, roughly 1/3, contribution to GDP, is now in dire trouble and some of them going bankrupt. That Xi Jinping is not prepared to rescue them. That they had an electricity problem recently because the Australians stopped sending them coal. They stopped sending the coal because they put sanctions on Australia for raising the issue of Wuhan virus. China is no longer the same China which is galloping in a very linear direction. There are problems within. Having said that, on the other side, the US, same story. So the water is too muddy. At the moment, again, going by the news, India apparently in a turbulent global political economy is good news. Hopefully, we can navigate and protect our interest. I have confidence that we will do that. 1997, 1 year before we conducted the nuclear test, there was Asian financial crisis. And then American sanctions over 1998 nuclear test. Indian economy grew 5%. That actually woke up the American business community and said, simply because Cold War is over, don't ignore India. There is a middle class, expanding middle class, economy is doing well, go ahead. Hopefully, we will navigate in the troubled water very well. Thank you very much for your attention. Big hand to all the paper presenters. The session is closed now. Thank you.
I would like to thank the chair and the speakers for such a illuminating discussion. I now request Dr. Seshadri Shari to present the chair and the speakers with a small token of appreciation. Just before we go for tea, I would like to tell the speakers and the chair for a small group photo.